The notification lit up my phone at 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. It was from my father, Grayson. Just 3 lines that changed my entire life. Shay, we've decided to keep dinner intimate this year. Just me, Coleman, and a few close friends. We'll catch up with you after the holidays. I stared at the screen. Intimate. That was his code word. It meant his new girlfriend, the one who was 26, 3 years younger than me, was coming over, and he didn't want my judgmental face ruining the mood. My brother Coleman, the golden child who had never worked a day in his life, would be there. I would not. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't even type out a response asking why. The clarity was instant. Cold and absolute. For 29 years, I had been the fixer, the safety net, the one who showed up. Today, I was the one they didn't need. I set my coffee down and opened my laptop. My hands were steady. I logged into my bank account, bypassed the savings I'd been building for a decade, and initiated a wire transfer. $650,000, the entire balance. The recipient was the county bank holding the foreclosure title on Blackwood Ridge, the sprawling, beautiful frozen ranch my brother Coleman had tried and failed to buy 3 months ago. He had bragged about it for weeks, claiming it was his destiny, before the financing fell through because, surprisingly, banks don't lend $500,000 to unemployed gamblers. I hit send. The screen flashed. Transfer complete. 20 minutes later, I was in my truck. I drove right past my childhood home. I saw Dad's car in the driveway. I saw the lights on the Christmas tree. I had bought them last year. I didn't tap the brakes. I kept driving, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror until it was just a small, meaningless speck against the snow. I wasn't going to their dinner. I was going to my ranch. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Blackwood Ridge wasn't a vacation home. It was a fortress of pine and stone sitting on 600 acres of Wyoming wilderness. When I pulled up the unplowed driveway, the snow was knee-deep. The house looked like a sleeping animal, dark, cold, and imposing. It was exactly what I needed. I stepped out of the truck, the wind cutting through my coat like a knife. My name is Shay. I'm 29 years old, and standing there in the biting wind, looking at a deed with only my name on it, was the first time I felt like a real person, not just an extension of my father's ego. I walked into the living room. It smelled of dust and neglect. Leaning against the stone hearth was a piece of plywood left behind from 3 months ago. Painted in sloppy red letters was Coleman's Lodge, coming soon. My brother had put it there when he was pre-approved for a loan that never existed. He had claimed the space before paying a dime, already visualizing the parties he would throw. I didn't toss it in the trash. I broke it over my knee. The sound cracked through the empty house like a gunshot. I threw the splintered wood into the fireplace and lit the first match. I watched his delusion turn into ash. It was the warmest the house had felt all day. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was probably Dad, realizing I wasn't coming to fix the turkey or smooth over the tension with his mistress. It was probably Coleman asking if I had brought his gifts. I didn't look. I went into the settings and started blocking. I silenced the aunts who only called when they needed money. One by one, I silenced them. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of hygiene. Then came the hardware. I didn't hire a crew. I climbed the ladder myself. I drilled high-def cameras into the eaves, angling them to cover the driveway, the porch, and the gate. I swapped out the rusted tumblers on the front door for heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolts. I drove the screws in deep, feeling the resistance of the wood. The click of that lock sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just metal on metal, It was the sound of a boundary that couldn't be argued with. That night, the wind howled against the windows trying to get in, but for the first time in my life, the cold stayed outside. I sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the absolute silence. It didn't feel lonely. It felt like ownership. They thought they had exiled me to the cold. They didn't realize they had just given me a kingdom. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen, the winter sun streaming across the scarred wooden floorboards. The silence was still heavy, but now, in the daylight, the weight of what I had done started to settle. I had spent $650,000 in cash, liquidated everything: my retirement, my emergency fund, the escape fund I had started building the day I turned 18. It sounds reckless, but I don't do reckless. I do math. My name is Shay, and I am a forensic accountant. People think that means I just look at spreadsheets all day. What I actually do is track stolen money for federal agencies. I find the shell companies cartels use to buy racehorses. I find the offshore accounts where CEOs hide their bonuses before declaring bankruptcy. I spend my life looking at numbers and seeing the ghosts of greed hiding behind them. But for all my training, I had been blind to the theft happening under my own roof. I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter and pulled up the spreadsheet I had named Family Expenses. It was a document I had never shown anyone. Line by line, it told a story of 29 years of robbery. There was the $50,000 I loaned Dad when his business was failing, a loan that became a gift the moment I signed the check. There was the $12,000 for Coleman's medical bills that I later found out was actually a settlement for a bar fight he started. Then there was the big one, $200,000. 3 years ago, Coleman had gotten into debt with people who didn't send late notices. They sent men with baseball bats. Dad had called me in a panic, weeping, saying they were going to kill his son. He didn't have the money. He begged me to save my brother. So I did. I liquidated my portfolio. I paid off the debt. I made the problem disappear. And how did they thank me? Dad bought Coleman a new truck a month later. Coleman told the family he had negotiated his way out of trouble. I became invisible again. Buying this ranch wasn't an impulse purchase. It was asset protection. I knew Dad was running out of liquidity. I knew Coleman was gambling again. I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for my grandmother's trust, the one fund I had managed to keep legally separate from them. If I hadn't spent that money on real estate in my name, Grayson would have guilt-tripped, bullied, or stolen it from me within 6 months. I looked out the window at the endless white fields. This land wasn't just dirt and snow, it was a vault. I had turned my liquid cash into solid earth, the one thing they couldn't weasel out of me with a sob story. They thought I bought it to be petty. They didn't realize I bought it to stop the bleeding. I closed the laptop. The ledger was balanced. Now I just had to wait for them to realize the bank was closed. 3 weeks of silence followed. It was the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that happens before a storm breaks. I spent those days working remotely, auditing a shell corporation in the Caymans from my living room, watching the snow pile up against the fence line. I knew they were coming. Men like my father don't accept rejection. They treat it like a negotiating tactic. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the dark, the only light coming from my laptop screen, when the ground vibrated. A heavy diesel engine. I didn't get up to look out the window. I didn't need to. I picked up my iPad and tapped the security app. On the screen, a black, heavy-duty pickup truck crunched up my driveway. It wasn't Dad's sedan. It was a rental. They parked right at the front porch. Dad stepped out first, wearing his business owner coat, the one he wore when he wanted to intimidate a subcontractor. Then came Coleman, looking around with a proprietary smirk, kicking the snow off his boots like he was already home. And finally, a third man, slick hair, cheap suit, holding a clipboard, a realtor. They weren't here to talk. They were here to list the property. I watched on the screen, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Dad walked up to the front door. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He pulled a key out of his pocket, the spare key to my old apartment in Portland. He slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He frowned, jiggled it, then shoved it harder. When the deadbolt didn't budge, he stepped back, looking at the door, not with confusion but with annoyance, as if the house was disobeying him. He said something to Coleman. Coleman laughed and pointed to the truck bed. Dad walked back to the truck and pulled out a crowbar. It was red, with chipped paint, heavy steel. I zoomed in on the camera feed. I needed to see his face. I needed to see if he looked angry or scared or guilty. But he didn't look like any of those things. He looked calm. He looked entitled. That was the moment I finally understood the trap I had been living in for 29 years. This is the trap of normalized cruelty. See, a stranger breaks into your house because they want your stuff. A father breaks into your house because he believes you are his stuff. He wasn't attacking the door because he hated me. He was doing it because, in his mind, my boundaries didn't exist. He truly believed that my money, my name, and my home were just extensions of him. He wasn't committing a crime in his eyes. He was just correcting an error. He was opening a door that had no right to be closed to him. It was a level of dehumanization so deep it looked casual. He wedged the flat end of the crowbar into the seam of the doorframe. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house louder than I expected. The realtor took a nervous step back, looking at his clipboard, but he didn't stop them. He probably thought this was just a lockout situation. Crunch. Dad put his weight into it. The heavy-duty screws I had installed groaned, fighting against the leverage, but it was only wood. With a final, sickening pop, the frame gave way. The door swung open. Dad didn't hesitate. He stepped over the threshold of my home, crowbar in hand, wiping his boots on my rug. I sat in the dark of the kitchen, 30 feet away, watching them enter the foyer. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I just saved the video file. I stayed in the shadows of the kitchen hallway, phone raised, recording every second. They moved with the efficiency of thieves who believe they have a moral right to the loot. Coleman walked over to my couch, the leather sectional I had bought with my first big bonus, and kicked it. "We can get maybe $500 for this," he said, his voice echoing in the empty foyer. He pulled a sheet of neon orange stickers from his pocket. Garage sale stickers. He slapped one onto my coffee table. Dad was already on his phone, pacing my living room. "Yeah, the listing goes live in an hour. Cash offers only. We need a quick close." He paused, looking around my home with a sneer. "Clean it out. Anything personal goes in the dumpster. We need this place to look like a blank slate." They weren't just trespassing, they were erasing me. They were stripping the house down to its bones so they could sell the carcass to cover a gambling debt. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt the cold, hard click of a trap springing shut. I looked down at my phone. The security app had a big red button labeled Panic. It wasn't connected to a call center in Arizona. It was wired directly to a silent relay I had set up with the county dispatch. I waited until Coleman picked up a vase my mother had given me, one of the few things I had left of hers, and tossed it carelessly onto a pile of junk. I pressed the button. There was no siren, no bells, just light. 8 high-intensity halogen floodlights mounted along the perimeter of the driveway and the porch slammed on simultaneously. The sudden brilliance turned the snowy night into a blinding white noon. Dad flinched, throwing his arm up to shield his eyes. What the hell? Through the front window, blue and red strobes cut through the white glare. They didn't come from down the road. They came from the edge of the property line where they had been waiting. Sheriff Donovan's cruiser roared up the driveway, blocking their rental truck. He stepped out, hand resting casually on his belt, his breath pluming in the cold air. But he wasn't alone. Ramona stepped out of the car, holding a thick black binder like a shield. My best friend, my lawyer, the one who knew everything. Dad recovered fast. He smoothed his coat, put on his reasonable man's smile, and greeted the sheriff like a host at a barbecue, spinning a story about a forced entry and a wellness check. He pointed at the broken door, calling me unstable and claiming he was protecting family property. Sheriff Donovan didn't move. He stared at the splintered wood. "That's not a wellness check," he said flatly. "That's a felony." Dad argued. "Family property, trustee rights." "No," I said, stepping into the light. "I live here." He insisted the ranch was bought with trust funds, making him untouchable. Ramona opened the binder. The metal rings snapped loud in the cold air. She cited Clause 4.04. Any trustee who commits a felony against trust property is immediately removed and forfeits all inheritance. The crowbar in Dad's hand suddenly mattered. The sheriff listed the charges: burglary, destruction of property, attempted grand larceny. The crowbar hit the porch. Dad accused me of trapping him. I didn't, I said. I just let you be yourself. Then he tried one last move, ordering my arrest for stealing his truck. The sheriff confirmed the report. I handed over a court judgment. A quiet title ruling, I said. Your name was removed last month. The sheriff's face hardened. Filing a false report made 2 felonies. He cuffed my father. As the cruiser pulled away, the trust transferred automatically to me. Later, Ramona and I sat on the porch as snow fell again. My phone buzzed with demands for bail money. I blocked the number. I locked the gate. I wasn't alone. I was free.